Salams from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani. You're watching Daily Debrief. We're leading the show again with our coverage of the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia has declared a unilateral partial ceasefire to allow for the evacuation of civilians from the cities of Mariupol and Volnovakha. Simultaneously, reports are coming in of civilians from the city of Mariupol boarding buses to be transported to Zaporizhia. We discussed yesterday, Zaporizhia is home to the largest nuclear power plant in all of Europe and therefore a key strategic location in the war. Also simultaneously, NATO has rejected Ukraine's call for a no-fly zone over the country, while US President Joe Biden says they will do everything to help the country defend itself. Helping us make sense of all of these mixed signals today is People's Dispatch's Prashant. Prashant, no real steps towards brokering a truce or a more comprehensive sort of ceasefire. What are the, help us make sense of these mixed signals, please.
Right, Siddhant. So I think the key thing here is, of course, look at the city of Mariupol, because Mariupol, we talked about it quite a few times on this show, is also one of the bases of the infamous Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi forces. It is considered one of the centers of the right wing in Ukraine itself. So it does see, and Mariupol has been under consistent attack over the past few days. So it does seem that Russia does intend to make a very strong offensive within Mariupol.
Right.
Now, one of the issues we talked about here is the fact that urban warfare in this specific war is going to be a very complex and actually potentially catastrophic event, because what we see is the likelihood, the risk of the fact that, on the one hand, the Russians do attack these big cities. The Ukrainians mount, for instance, a strong defense, a lot of civilians. The casualties are going to be immense. It's going to be a massive disaster. And Russia does know that this is one thing it does want to avoid. That is what the indications are, because among other things, we see the fact that, for instance, despite having a substantial force outside Kiev, they have not launched a full-fledged assault on Kiev yet. Or for that matter, they have not launched a full-fledged, troop assault on many of the other cities as well. So far, Kherson has been one of the few big cities under the Russian control. So there's Kharkiv, there is Kiev, there is Odessa, Mariupol, for instance. All of these are important cities, none of which have been taken. So it is possible that the ceasefire that we're talking about here is perhaps a prelude to a much more stronger Russian offensive, because it seemed from the very beginning, and we talked about this before as well, that a key Russian strategic aim in this war was to sort of establish some kind of control over the eastern side of Ukraine, and the southern sides of Ukraine. So that would be the parts which are bordering the Black Sea. So we saw assaults from Crimea, for instance. There is a possibility of them moving towards Odessa. We saw, also the Russian attacks taking place in the Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, which is the Donbas region. So while it's unclear exactly what kind of presence the Russians are seeking to establish in this area, whether it's like whether it's going to be some kind of buffer zone, whether it's going to be completely under Russian control, whether it is going to be the Donetsk and Luhansk republics themselves sort of administering some of these areas. All of that is very unclear, and that factors into a larger issue we'll talk about, which is that there is still very little idea of what the Russian war aims are. We know the larger strategic end game, which is to prevent NATO's expansion, ensure Ukraine's neutrality, etc. But we don't know what specifically in the context of this attack, this war, the end game is. So a lot of it depends on that, but it does perhaps look like Mariupol might be facing a major offensive in the coming days, and that might be one reason why this kind of a humanitarian corridor has been established, so that at least as many civilians as possible do not get caught in this conflict. Like I said, of course, the potential for disaster looming large on if that happens. For Russia, again, it would be a major PR disaster in that way, irrespective of whether it achieves its war aims or not.
Of course.
Massive civilian casualties would be something that the Russians want to avoid. Also because the fact that they have to consider the fact that at some point they need to sort of engage with the Ukrainians for a more long-term solution. So any kind of civilian casualties from the Russian perspective, the more casualties that take place, the less the possibility of any kind of negotiation taking place, and especially if there's mass casualties like in these cities. So very tense couple of days lying ahead probably. We do know that this is a short window as far as the ceasefire talks are concerned, this ceasefire is concerned. So what is going to happen over this weekend remains to be seen, because maybe some of these offensives could take place the weekend as well. Remains to be seen, and so that's what the strategic overall situation is right now. As regarding the peace talks, the important thing is, again, like I said, both sides, the Russians have not revealed their actual aims yet. So they're probably waiting for a moment of key strategic advantage, at which point they can full-fledgedly commit. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, know that any sign they give of of what is weakness from their side will become a problem for them. They also, how much autonomy they have is a big question. It's probably good to argue that they're basically under the control of NATO right now. So a lot of questions ahead on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Prashant. Also, equally unclear is Ukraine's end game in this entire scenario. But they have asked for this no-fly zone, which NATO has rejected. What is the objective of that?
I would say Ukraine's endgame is slightly more clearer in the sense that, one, they definitely do want to grind down the Russians in a protracted urban warfare. So that is very clearly their aim, because for them, a large part of their war aims involve bringing the rest of Europe and the United States and NATO as much into the conflict as possible, because that is clearly their only way out, because the Ukrainian army alone is not going to withstand this attack. So I think their single point focus is to rally as much Western support as possible in whatever ways. And this is happening through a variety of ways. So, Vladimir Zelensky, for instance, undertaking a massive PR exercise. He's addressing the US Senate today. He addressed the European Parliament the other day. His tone alternates between hopefulness, or scathing criticism, like today, where he said that because NATO has not enacted the no-fly zone, it basically means that everyone who dies is NATO's responsibility as well. So a variety of statements he's making on these lines. So they, I think, have a largely one-track strategy in the sense that increase Russian losses and sort of try to bring in NATO by the fact that more and more civilian casualties might be taking place. Now, the no-fly zone argument is a specifically dangerous one, because what a no-fly zone, enforcing a no-fly zone basically means that NATO will have to prevent Russian planes from flying over Ukraine. And the only way you can do that is by shooting them down. So basically what Zelensky wants is for NATO to actually enter the war militarily in Ukraine, take on the Russians by air. So there's no other way that you can maintain a no-fly zone. And the no-fly zone demand is important because in 2000, if you remember Libya, Gaddafi was overthrown only because of the no-fly zone, because NATO basically entirely destroyed his air force, which was the major advantage that he had over the rebels, who were the people who were fighting against him. And that was really what enabled the tide to turn. So what Zelensky wants pretty much is exactly the same. He wants that, and at least some sense is prevailing. Why one can hope in the West and NATO that they're refusing that. They made it very clear they won't do that. He's painting this as a betrayal, but what he's asking for is basically something close to World War III. So I think it is a good, for whatever reasons, it's a good thing that NATO is not entering this conflict at this point, because the moment, like we talked about before, one NATO soldier and one Russian soldier clash, one NATO flight and one NATO plane and one Russian airplane clash, we are in very, very dangerous territory. So I think that's that's a huge thing to be beware of at this point of time. I don't think the Russians want it. I don't think the NATO wants it at this point.
And definitely the rest of us don't want it.
Absolutely. So Zelensky, so that is pretty much really their aim as far as the Ukrainians are concerned.
All right. Thanks, Prashant, for that update. We'll, of course, keep covering this conflict and others as things develop in our next show. But moving on now to slightly more peripheral aspects of the conflict. The International Cat Federation has banned Russian cats from international competitions, condemning the invasion of Ukraine as what it's called an unprecedented act of aggression. FIFA, a group that considers itself the United Nations of Cat Federations, with members from over 40 countries, said in a statement on its website that it cannot just witness these atrocities and do nothing. Elsewhere, Chelsea Football Club, the reigning club champions of Europe, currently owned by Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich, is up for sale. For an assessment of what's going on these fronts this Saturday, Leslie Xavier joins us now. This war in Europe is being played out on all kinds of different fronts. We've talked before on the show about sanctions imposed on Russia and Russian athletes by various sports bodies, including FIFA, of course, and the Olympic Committee. What's happening with Chelsea Football Club, and why has that become kind of a central theme or a talking point, at least, in the wider context?
It's two-pronged, actually. It's part of that sport narrative that we discussed about, where sports soft power is being used. So that includes the business angle of it.
Right.
And at the same time, it's also part of the larger sense of economic sanctions that is happening. So Russian business interests are there all over the world, and in sport, particularly in the UK, we have, Roman Abramovich has been in this game for a while now. I
Yeah.
mean, early 2000s he bought Chelsea, and after that he has been forever associated with Premiership itself, not just the club, because he has become a brand in itself in
Yeah.
that.
And one of the much loved owners.
Loved owners and visible owners also.
Yeah.
He's always there for the
Changed
matches.
the fortunes
Yeah.
of Chelsea in
Exactly.
that sense.
So is interest in sport, interest in football, in the football club is larger than, say, for instance, if you compare the American owners in the club, and they have their business interests, they pump in money, but they seem to be a little disconnected with the culture of the football club, what the club represents, and all these things, English football industry, because they come from a different business side as well. So the current question that has been raised on is ownership of the club. It stems from politics, and it's been raised even in the Parliament, British Parliament as well. So pressure is on him on that front, and suddenly he just decided that, I mean, initially the point that was hinted as was he is very close to Putin, and he has interests in Russian politics as well. So that means we shouldn't have him here as part of the efforts to push Russia back. But I mean, the larger point here is in this move, where does Abramovich stand himself? Because it could be the other way around also. Like I foresee this idea that maybe he doesn't want to get involved in a British club as well, because he's Russian and he's probably proud and he wants to stand with in this country. But he's not portraying it as such. Which is probably a PR exercise, because the larger game in sport business is that. So if you are invested in sport and its business, so you probably want to maintain that persona across the world as well, where you are politically and diplomatically correct. So he's trying to portray that. And the sale in itself, if you look at it, it makes solid business sense. The timing, yeah, it is wrong. It's in the middle of a war, and we have to also question whether this is what we should be discussing about, we ourselves, in that matter, because it's a football club. Let them sell, let them buy. It doesn't matter. People are losing lives. That's more important, right? Yeah. But it's come up, and if you look at it, Chelsea are Champions League winners, and they have a presence in the World Club Championship. Their brand is slowly rising. In fact, during the reign of Abramovich, it has risen in stature over the years. It has been a contender over the years for the Premiership title, and also we winner right now European champions as well. So a great time to sell. Probably they can value the club more, and Abramovich will look like a hero on both sides of the fence.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're saying question, and we do question definitely. And I think the answer to some of those questions is that in the end, the capitalists always profit from war, and that is an underlying also factor that must, I think, be considered. But thanks for that update, Leslie. We're moving on now to a slightly different subject. The largest democracy in the world, India, is holding a key election cycle. 5 Indian states, including the largest state in the country, Uttar Pradesh, have in fact today concluded the second round of polling for new assembly elections. The other states going to polls are Punjab, Goa, Manipur and Uttarakhand. Joining us now for the details or updates on the situation, the electoral situation, as well as what might happen from the perspective of the Bharatiya Janata Party, the ruling party in the centre, and what its fortunes might be, is NewsClick's Pragya Singh. Pragya, when I said from the perspective of the BJP, I didn't mean, of course, that you're representing the BJP, but just that because the BJP is ruling at the centre in India and has such a massive mandate. Most of us in our analysis are focusing on how they are doing in the elections.
That's right, yes.
So give us a bit of context first. UP being the biggest state, naturally a focal point in all of these conversations around politics, held panchayat elections, which are grassroots democratic elections.
Right.
So give us a bit of context and how things have gone from your reportage.
Right. So, at the end of last year, the panchayat elections in Uttar Pradesh threw up results which were surprising. The Samajwadi Party, which is challenging the BJP right now in these elections, actually got far more seats than the BJP did.
Right.
And that was 760 versus 719, which is quite significant. So if the if politics is local, then the most local level has gone in favor of the Samajwadi Party in that election. And so that's important only because these elections, the assembly election, comes very soon after that poll. That said, now what's happening is very interesting because the ruling party, the BJP, says that this election is multipolar, meaning that there are many more than 2 contestants in each seat, whereas the opponents of the BJP, especially the Samajwadi Party, says that it is a bipolar contest between itself and the BJP. If you speak to people and if you listen to what the analysts are saying, it does look like a Akhilesh Yadav versus, interestingly, Narendra Modi, meaning the Prime Minister.
Right.
Now, the Prime Minister has stakes in this election because his party is contesting. But also, he has greater stakes this time because the Chief Minister doesn't seem to be as popular. There seems to be widespread discontent, even resentment against some of the policies, and also the impact of some of those policies, like particularly on the cattle front. The BJP has repeatedly said that it will, employment is not an issue, and so on and so forth. But they have repeatedly responded to the charge of the opposition parties that unemployment is a big issue. They have said that they will provide one job to every member of a family in Uttar Pradesh if they are voted back into power. They have also turned around and said that they will solve the problem of the cattle menace. The issue here is that the BJP isn't committed to government jobs. You see, the resentment against the BJP, one of the reasons for it is that there are no government jobs, that there is widespread privatization. And discrediting of the reservation, right? So that can only be solved if you give government jobs, which is what people want. On the cow menace situation, again, the BJP's Hindutva plank is the reason for the menace. So now, what solution can they possibly give? If they talk about reopening the slaughterhouses, they will alienate their voters. And if they talk about funding the gaushalas, the cattle sheds, now people would see that as a wasted effort as well as a waste of, poor states' money.
Yeah, resources. Absolutely.
So that's where we stand right now. The battle has become the Prime Minister versus Akhilesh Yadav. We cannot say for sure that the Prime Minister also has the same appeal he did as before COVID. Right, so they are responding for the first time. You see the BJP actually responding actively to the charges made by the opposition.
Right.
Whereas earlier they would more confidently just swish them aside.
Yeah. There are of course 4 other states that are also polling. Any broader trends that you see, at least commonalities in terms of issues among these states? They are very disparate states, no doubt.
Definitely in Punjab, the farmer movement is the one dominant narrative was set by the fact that the Punjabi farmers had landed up in Delhi to protest. And they are the ones who had mobilized the action from the other states. The movements in other states joined after the Punjabi farmers came in November, on November 26 when they landed up in Delhi. So that movement, and also a sense of disenchantment towards all the parties in the state, in Punjab, the Akali Dal, which was then ally of the BJP at the center, and also the Congress party, which has been caught up in its own pressures. So what people are waiting to see is whether the Aam Aadmi Party is able to make inroads. The reports from the ground generally tend to say that it's, again, like Uttar Pradesh, a very tight contest, and that it's unpredictable what the result might be. Even in Uttar Pradesh, you hear this, a section of people saying that there should not be a very strong government. And in Punjab also, you probably have this voter disenchantment, which has left people wondering whether it might even be a hung assembly and nobody might get a clear verdict. But all that we'll know only once the results are out.
Which will be on the 10th of March, hopefully, and everything goes according to plan with the Election Commission of India. We will have, of course, on our sister channel NewsClick, we do have and we will have extensive coverage of that, of those election results on March 10th, so you can join us for that. But that's all we have on this episode of Daily Debrief. For more on all of these stories, please visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and do give us a follow on all the regular social media platforms for updates. We'll be back again on Monday. See you then. Stay safe. Goodbye.